Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy, and this is an extended edition. Extended Episode 1, Introduction to XPages. Okay, in this episode, I'm obviously going to break my 9-minute rule, and we're going to go longer. So good luck with that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to do the session that I gave at MW Lug in Cleveland. I gave two sessions there: the introduction X pages, and then a more advanced one. So this is the first of the two sessions that I gave, and we're gonna go for maybe about 60 minutes, give or take, and buckle up, I guess. Okay, so what's the goals for today? Well, what I really want to do is I'm going to assume that you know very little to nothing about XPages. So if you work for Group or El Gucci, you might as well just move on. There's nothing to see here. But if you're a Notes client developer and web developer who wants to start getting into XPages, has seen some of the blog posts, seen some of the people talking about and the power that it can give you, this is hopefully a good place to get a start. We're going to do slides and walkthrough like I do on the normal 9-minute screencasts, but there's going to be more of them. So again, good luck with that. What we're going to do is in the demo section of this, I'm going to demo some code and this little sample app that I put together, but it's not a best practices kind of code. The next session of the extended edition series and my screencasts are more focused on best practices. This is really kind of designed for just getting started and being easily digestible to the Notes client developer who hasn't seen this yet. So just keep that in mind that this is just a starting point. It's not an end point. Okay, so XPages, who cares? I mean, what is the big deal? Well, I think it's a big deal, obviously, and I think it's the biggest development enhancement we've gotten since LotusScript, which was back in R4. I mean, we've gotten some cool stuff since then, especially the LotusScript editor. Thank you very much, and some of the web services stuff. But I mean, nothing of the scale of XPages for development. So hooray. It's designed to kind of, we've always had rapid application development for the Notes client, but we never had that for the really the web stuff. It was always slower and quite honestly more painful trying to develop for the Domino web. So this is designed to fix that, and it fixes it by modernizing Domino's the web server by using JavaServer Faces as this underlying technology. So it's Java based, it's very robust, and it's very fast and powerful. It eliminates a lot of the hacks from classic Domino development. Really. I mean, who wants to put HTML into view columns? I don't. I mean, that's like hot peppers. It's like eating pure pain. Some of the things we had to do to try and make good websites in classic Domino development. So this fixes most of that. Sometimes it adds its own new pain, but it's different pain, so that's what makes it better. But it really is a lot better, and as you're going to see, it also bundles in Dojo, and Dojo is this great JavaScript framework for like advanced UI features and some other features. So it comes bundled in. Now Dojo is not specific to Notes or IBM or so. I mean, this is what real people use. People not in the yellow universe. So it's the same tool set that you can find on almost any website or advanced website today. So that's kind of cool to have that available to us. Another great thing is almost every property is computed. You've got these blue diamonds everywhere, and you can put code behind these blue diamonds to compute almost anything that you're interested in computing. And you also get choice, and I love choice. I mean, don't you? So we've got a choice of how we want to code. So we can code in the IDE, similar to kind of like what we've done before in form design and things like that, or we can go into the XML source and code just in the source. Now it's not the true source for anyone who knows better and has stuck with it so far, but it's enough of the source for the purposes of today's conversation. The real source is everything gets compiled to Java, but that's for a discussion for later on. Okay, so what does XPages fix? Well, the first big one that it gives us is it separates our UI from our data. So a form is always attached to a document. Well, no longer. An X page is not necessarily attached to a document. You can have an X page without any data on it whatsoever. You can have an X page that's bound to multiple documents at the same time. Or you can have an X page bound to multiple views of multiple documents at the same time. So that you have a true separation between your UI and data finally, which is very nice. Another cool thing that I like is it's very easy to access data from other databases. So that really helps with the whole rip and replace mentality. I mean, you could have a perfectly fine Notes client application that you want to start modernizing and bringing to the web. Well, you can do that. You can even do that in your own in a separate Domino database. So you could actually have a Domino database that has no data whatsoever, but only contains XPages code that attaches to your data. So it's nice and safe, it's isolated, but no one's any wiser. So it's very kind of convenient to do things like that nowadays. Another big one is the improved data handling that we get with XPages. Well, what do we get? We get joins finally. We get the ability to do a DB lookup inside a view. We get the ability to do a DB lookup inside of you. It's so cool I said it twice. So now if you've got a company and you've got contacts that are associated with that company and you want to have a flat view of the contacts, but you want the company name inside that view. I mean, what did you do in the old days? Well, you'd probably have to push that company name down and have agents to keep it updated if it changes or so. Now you can use keys or so, and you can just do a lookup inside the view. I mean, that rocks. I mean, there's no two ways about that. Another thing that's a personal favorite of mine is an X-Page application can run inside the Notes client. So we finally get write the darn thing once and run it twice. And the Notes client running XPages is kind of cool because you can still replicate it. So offline you can take your website or you can take this web application and use it in a disconnected state. It respects readers, fields, and the ACL and all that good jazz, like you would expect from any Notes application. So, wow! I mean, me personally, the way I've worked, I love that. Okay, so other goodies we get is this concept of scoped variables. Okay, now these scoped variables are these memory sections that we can use to store data, and we can use this in replacement in some instances of URL parsing and cookies. So what we can do is we can basically create a variable that spans multiple pages. So it might be available to every page of our application. So we got these four scopes. The first one is application scope, and this is available to every user. So you'd store things on it like like you might use a profile document for. So maybe the name of the application, various lookup strings or whatnot, and then every person in the application can take advantage of it. The next popular one is session scope, and that's user specific, and it's the life of the user session. So as long as I'm navigating through my page and I don't time out or anything like that, whatever I put in session scope is going to be available to me. So if I want to have a key that I get from one page and use that in a second page, I can just put it in memory and not have to worry about any kind of URL parsing and things like that. Now, you can't bookmark it necessarily, so you have to take that into consideration, but it's very handy to just pass data around and keep things alive. View scope is the life of the page for the particular user. Now, what I like to do with that is if I've got a search field, whatever the search term is, I might put that into the view scope, and then if the person navigates away from that page and then navigates back, that search control is blank again because it has refreshed that view scope based on the page change. So that's one example. And then there's request scope, which is really short and has some more specific uses for that. Okay, so What exactly is XPages? Well, it's a group of new design elements that were introduced in version 8.5 of Notes Domino. And it's important to note that they were greatly improved in 8.5.1 and again in 8.5.2. So if you are doing XPage development, it really helps to be on the latest possible version because they just keep making it better. It's built on top of JavaServer Faces. Don't panic. Take a breath. It's okay. You don't need to know Java server faces, and you don't need to know Java, but knowing a little Java can probably help you. So what XPages is, it's this buffer of design elements to protect you from Java server faces, so you don't get bloody in the whole Java world. So that's kind of cool. So everything you do in XPages will compile down to Java objects that you never need to see or touch. So it's very digestible to a Domino developer like me who doesn't know much about Java at all. But what's cool about this is if you're talking to a non-Domino person about what you're doing, don't even mention the next page. Just say, "Oh yeah, I'm working in Java Server Faces," and that might get their attention a little more and possibly a little more respect, because that's what it is. I mean, that's not a lie. It's Java Server Faces. Okay, so it's a group of new design elements, of which the first one is the X page. And on the surface, this does seem very close to a notes form. But it really isn't. You don't have to have data definition, so it's kind of like a page and a form all in one. Or you can have more than one document bound to it at a time, which you couldn't do before. So it's really different. And there's something else we're going to talk about a little bit: custom controls. And custom controls are similar like subforms, but the X page eventually will be more of a container to hold custom controls. So as you advance, you're going to do less on the actual X page and more on custom controls, and each section of your page might be a custom control. And since I've started talking about them, let's talk about custom controls. Well, custom controls are similar to a subform, but they are a lot more powerful than that because you can use them more than once on a page, so they are reusable in the same page. And you can also define your own parameters that you can pass into a custom control to change the look and feel at runtime. And as I started to allude on the last slide, is eventually more of your work should be done in a custom control. So your pages kind of turn into like bite-sized pieces, and the X page just contains them. Not long ago, I was working on a form at the day job where it was like that had like 100 fields, and I tried to put it all on an X page, and it was kind of overwhelming. So what I ended up doing is I broke it down into this form to like the 6 sections that it was, and each section was its own custom control. So there's I don't know 15 or so fields in each section, and I could style it a little easier, and it was just more digestible. And then I would import each custom control onto one X page, and it just looked like one form or one X page at that point. So that's kind of the beauty of custom controls. Okay, another new design element is the Serverside JavaScript library. So JavaScript is the language of choice, but don't panic on that one either. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. It's really not as bad as you might think if you've not used JavaScript. You also get themes. Themes allow things like consistent look and feel. You can create your own. It comes with one UI and web standard are built in. And it's kind of like this global use statement for CSS to just make CSS files available to every page of your application, and you can get much more advanced with that to override the look and feel of various controls and stuff if you really want to get fancy and customize things. Okay, so that's the new. Well, about the old? Well, I guess they say out with the old. So a lot of the old design elements you're no longer going to need. Frame sets, outlines, navigators, and pages. See ya. It was nice knowing you. You still do need forms and views. They're going to stick around. Forms are going to be used to define your fields, and views are going to be kind of like queries in an Access database. the form might be the table, the view might be like the query. So for lookups and sorting and things like that, you're going to use views. You still need agents, and agents still can use Lotus script. So you're not going to get that far away from your Lotus script knowledge. And a cool thing about 852 is you can have a Lotus script agent that accesses the in-memory XPages document, so without even having to save it. So that's kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of good to get away from Lotus script a little bit from performance reasons. But if you got a lot of back-end logic, or you're having some trouble, you can reuse a fair amount of your Lotus script that way. Okay, so what is in a language? Well, JavaScript and Java itself are languages of choice in XPages. There's no question about it. Lotus script is not at the same level as JavaScript any longer. But JavaScript isn't so scary. I mean, I don't know JavaScript that well. And because as a Notes client developer, I never really used it. But in XPages, I'm starting to use it a lot. Well, when I don't know how to do something, I go to W3 Schools. It gives you the syntax for an if statement. It gives you a syntax for various looping and things like that. So it's easy. Google's your friend. It's easy to find these JavaScript syntax helpers to give you a push in the right direction. You don't need to know Java, but it might help because you can use Java objects directly inside server-side JavaScript. So that's kind of powerful and kind of cool. I mean, with server-side JavaScript is not really JavaScript. It's just a syntax. We get some other things in it, like we can use the Domino backend objects that you use in Lotus script. So you already know what those are. You can use at formulas with minor syntax changes. You already know what the at formulas are. So with at formulas and the backend objects, server-side JavaScript kind of looks a lot more like Lotus script than you might think about it. But you do have to watch out because it's JavaScript and everything is case sensitive. Okay, so let's look at what I'm talking about here. So server-side JavaScript can take an at formula, basically. So here's an at formula, which could be inside and server-side JavaScript. You probably know what this does without having to look at it. Add DB column, add DB name, a view name. So let's just do a lookup for a particular view, basically, a DB column. Okay, now there's a couple differences here. We're going to use commas rather than semicolons. It's very case sensitive. Note the open and close paren after the at DB name. But other than that, it's at formula language. It's something that you're probably very familiar with. Okay, again, now let's look at this. Okay, here's server-side JavaScript. Var key equals document get item value string field name or so. Well, other than the var, that looks like Lotus script for the most part. And I know get item value string is a new method, but again, it looks like Lotus script. So what are we going to do? We're going to take a field from the document and put it into the variable named key, and then the next line, db lookup db name. Now we're doing a db lookup using that key and putting the return value into the variable called ID, and then we're returning ID. So again, this is server-side JavaScript, but it looks like Lotus script. And it's actually better than Lotus script because not only do we have the JavaScript syntax, we've got the Domino objects, and we've got at formulas. And notice there's no eval statement. So basically what IBM did is they took the bulk of the at formulas that made sense and basically rewrote them as like Java objects. So there's no penalty for performance in using an at DB lookup in this case, as you might have like a small performance penalty using an eval in Lotus script. So that's that's awesome. So this isn't that scary. I mean, it's something that we've seen time and time again for the most part. Okay, so the next big score is that in server-side JavaScript, session and database objects are globals. So, oh my God, how many times have we typed in dim session is new notes session, dim database is notes database, set database equals session current database? Oh my gosh, I mean, it's like muscle memory. Well, no more. You don't have to do that anymore because they're globals and they're available to you. And not only are they available to you, any document you bind is available to you. So it's very easy to get a handle on the current document. So you don't have to mess around with the Notes UI workspace or anything, UI documents and all that malarkey. So that's great. That's a huge time saver. Another thing that you do want to watch out for in server-side JavaScript is where you would use a dim, you must use a var. So if you look at this code, we want to set a view. We want to get a view and set it to a variable. You do var view equals database dot get view view name. And if you don't use the var, here's what's going to happen. It's going to be basically kind of like a more global object, and it's going to mess you up, and you're not going to know why it messes you up. So you're gonna beg to help from one of your buddies from IBM, and they're not going to be able to find the answer. So they're going to send the question to the head of the XPage development team for IBM, who's going to look at your code, and he's going to find the problem right away, and he's going to laugh at you, and then you're going to be very embarrassed. And yeah, that probably did happen to me. So just put vars in and save yourself that embarrassment because you don't want that. Okay, so before we go on, let's just talk about a couple quick definitions of what a framework is, because I've mentioned this JavaScript framework Dojo before, and it's just this pre-built code that you can use to do stuff, and more often than not, it's free, so we like that. I've talked about Dojo. jQuery is another very popular JavaScript framework that's built into XPages, or not. It's not built in XPages. Dojo is, but jQuery could be used in XPages as well if you wanted to use that functionality. They just have to, download it. So there are some considerations in the performance aspect of it, but it does work. For CSS frameworks, I particularly like Blueprint, and I've done many screencasts on Blueprint, I think, and the One UI is built into XPages. Okay, so another thing to just go over quickly is the changes to Domino Designer. If you haven't seen those yet, if you're still on R7 or earlier. So Domino Designer is now inside Eclipse, and Eclipse is what makes a lot of this stuff work. So you're going to have these working sets, and you can have multiple working sets to hold your different databases. So you can group them by related databases or whatnot. It's important to note that you have the ability to modify your perspective. So if you don't like the working sets on the left, you want them on the right, well, move them. You can add things to your perspective. If you are a Java person, you can add some kind of Java package thing that the Java people seem to like. So there's a lot of power there in the ability to change your programming environment around. You have this new outline panel for XPage development down in the bottom left-hand corner, which kind of helps you zero in quickly on different design elements, which can be quite helpful. I talked before about the source of the XPage, and that's very easy to access this XML source. Again, it's not the true source for the purists out there, but for the Notes client, geeks like me, it's good enough to get stuff done. And you can do things in there, like you can add HTML directly. Like there's no custom control for field set. Okay, well, how do you do a field set? Well, you just go into the source and you can basically just type it in. So that's really kind of powerful. The design elements are double clicks rather than single clicks. There is a help system. That's all I'm going to say about that. It does exist. It's not a myth, but it could use some help itself. It's not just a clever name. Okay, so creating an XPage application. You're going to use forms to define your data. You don't need, since if it's only going to be an XPage application, you don't need any markup on your forms. You don't need colors and graphics and fonts and stuff like that. Just throw the fields on there. Nothing else is needed if it's just going to be a pure XPage application. It's still possible to use @formulas, and you can use compute with form inside an XPage. So if you've got some @formula business logic, it can still apply for XPages. And that's actually not a bad practice from what I understand, just computing everything with a form inside the XPage world, if only for field types. You're going to use views to structure your data for lookups and sorting. So those are two classic design elements that you're going to probably start most of your XPage applications with. Okay, XPages is Web 2.0. And when you think of Web 2.0, what do you think of? Well, you think of Ajax. Well, in XPages, an Ajax call for a partial page refresh, for instance, is as easy as a checkbox. You think of CSS. Well, unlike the Notes client, which kind of like put its toe in the water with CSS, but never fully embraced it, CSS is fully available to your XPage application. So you can have a lot of advanced UI look and feels that would be impossible in the Notes client. You can use one of those frameworks, Blueprint or One UI, or you can create your own. Validation, you think of nice methods to handle validation where you get little pretty things on the screen saying this field is required. So that's very easy to do in XPages. And again, for more advanced features like accordion controls and tab controls and whatnot, you can always go out to Dojo for things like that. Okay, so let's talk about CSS for a minute, because that's what you're going to use to make your apps look pretty. But there's a lot of CSS techniques out there and a lot of frameworks, and they're not all very digestible to XPages. What you want to do is you want to stick to class selectors, which is the period in the CSS to make it a CSS class. And for the most part, you want to avoid the ID selectors, which is preceded with that hash symbol. And what goes on there is XPages, for now not everywhere, but for the controls at least, it will override the ID that you give to a control. So whatever you name it, it's going to change the name of it. Oh, okay, that kind of seems like that stinks. But there's a reason for it. And the reason for it is because if you have a control and a custom control, and you want to use that custom control more than once on an X page, which is actually kind of common, you can't have a control with the same ID name. They're supposed to be unique. So what it does is it basically prepends various tags in front of the control name, and which makes it different than what you expected it to be. So the ID selector is just not an option really for the controls, at least. I mean, I guess you can kind of use them for more static elements. I just try to avoid them altogether. But that's just me. Okay, so what else do we get that's Web 2.0 in XPages? Well, we get a good way to do Typeahead. Very easy. We get good validation controls. The best thing about XPages really is the repeat control, which is very powerful. And a pager control. I mean, how hard is it to do classic Domino development, or how hard is it to do a pager control inside classic Domino web development? Seriously, I don't know. I think it's hard because I don't know how to do it. I'm sure there's a post out there somewhere, but it's not easy. That much I do know. Okay, so let's talk about the Typeahead. Well, Typeahead is built into the edit box field, and you can use a DB column. You can use a DB lookup if you wanted to. And so here's a formula that you might want to use. At DB column, DB name, your view name by application, and the row one. And we looked at that formula earlier for the most part. But you do have to be careful because for some unknown reason, which I don't understand, dbcom still has a 64K limit. So that's kind of a bite. So what do you do instead? Well, you can use a DB lookup instead, and you can use this formula here that I think Mark Hughes is a blogger who originally blogged this, and you can basically say it's a partial match, and so then basically on like the second key press, it'll do the lookup, and you'll get ideally less than 64K of data coming back. Now there are these modes in there that you got to be careful if you're doing this. You want to make sure you use full Typeahead mode rather than partial, and I have a more advanced demo on that in one of the earlier NotesIn9 screencasts. Okay, validating field. There's two ways to validate in XPages, client side and server side. Now, in normal web development, most of the validation, I believe, was client side, but it's so easy to do this in server side. You might end up just gravitating there. Sure, it's another trip to the server, but it's just so easy to do it on the server side. You might want to gravitate to that. So just kind of keep that in mind. The server allows for targets for your error messages. Again, this is kind of really built in. We've got two controls. We've got a display error control for individual messages that you might put to the right of your required fields, or you could have a display errors control, which would group all your validation failed messages together at the top or the bottom. Required and length are built in, and very easy to do, or many other validators are available. So keep that in mind. Okay, repeat control. I love the repeat control. What the repeat control is, it's kind of like showing a view without making it look like a view. So there's no styling. So you can put the fields wherever you want and just repeat over them. So you can make boxes, which I'm going to show you in another screencast. You can basically have whatever look and feel you want. It doesn't need to look like a table, and you can do lookups inside a repeat. You can repeat another repeat. So you can have a repeat control, and for each row or record that you're repeating, you can basically have a whole nother repeat control on that line. So you can make your own categorized views for the most part. But you're not just repeating views. I mean, it could be any kind of list-based data. It could be JSON. It could be a multi-value field. It could be like a Java vector or so. So that's really kind of powerful, and that's really kind of cool. And repeat controls can be bound to a pager, or I guess the other way around. A pager can be bound to a repeat control. It's already created with a view control, so you get nice pagination built in. That's very easy to do. Page 1, page 2, last page, etc. You've got several look and feels that are built in, or you can even build your own. So that's kind of cool and powerful. Okay, so man, that was tough, but that's enough of the slides. Let's go to the application walkthrough. Okay, so here's a little concept application that I want to use as an example, and it's going to be a company and contact type of application. So we can have companies over here, and we can have contacts associated with the companies, and we can see that down here. And if we look at another one, you can see that we get the right contacts for the right company. Okay, first thing that we're gonna go through this kind of like pretty in depth. So the first thing I want to do is show you it in Designer behind the scenes. So this application starts out like most applications with forms and views. So if we look at the forms, here's our company form. And the first thing you notice is there's just fields here. We don't need anything else because we're not going to be using this inside the Notes client. We're only going to be using this inside XPages. In the form, I just want to highlight one kind of neat thing here is if we look at the properties of the form, and this is new to 8.5, is we have this option here to display XPage instead. So that's a way to link the document that has this form field on, F company. So it's a way to link the document with an X page, in this case called X company. So the form is F company, and that gets saved onto the document, and we can link this to X company. And we've got a couple other forms here, one for contact, and very similar. If we look at the form properties, that links to X contact, etc. So it's a very easy to understand relationship. And we've got some states, and then we've got some views. We've got views by company names, if they show up here. We have contacts view, etc. Now, what you don't see on here is any kind of HTML inside the view, because that was kind of silly and painful, and you don't have to do that anymore, and thank goodness for that. Okay, so what else do we have inside this database? Well, we've got XPages, of course, and so we've got a bunch of XPages that make up this database. Most XPage apps will have a lot of custom controls. I only have one currently, and this is kind of like a header with the name of my tiny app and some buttons or so. So that's all I've got going on right now, and I've applied that custom control to each page. What else do we have here? There's nothing in the shared elements, resources. I don't have any style sheets, and I don't have any themes applied right now. And because I don't have any style sheets and I don't have any themes, the application is rather ugly. And it might look better than a classic Domino web application out of the box, but it's still not pretty by any stretch. So let's see what we can do to fix that up. So if I go to our application into Application Properties, there's a section down here called XPages. Well, if we click on this, the application theme is server default, which really means none for the most part. Well, I'm not a huge fan of One UI, but if we were to type One UI here, we could get some added benefits. So if we save this, and we're using the built-in One UI theme, if we come back to our browser and refresh it, okay, well, that's an improvement at least. Now we've got some prettier buttons. We got a little gradient back here. It carries over to every button everywhere, and that's one of the powers of themes is you can kind of control things and just push it down everywhere. But I don't want to get too into themes for this session. So that's simply how we can just kind of get a quick little improvement on our look and feel. Another thing I want to mention here is I've turned off client validation. I want to use server-side validation because it's just that much easier, and the results are pretty good. So the round trip to the server is not the end of the world. I'm also going to turn on, at least for development, this display, and this is off by default, but turn on display XPages runtime error page. Debugging XPages is not fun. It's kind of like eating very spicy hot peppers. It's like eating pure pain. But you have to do it every now and then just because your buddy eggs you on. So what you can do is to at least give yourself a small leg up is you put a check mark there, and then it will give you a little more details about the error message. So debugging is more of an art than a science. So this is kind of all you have right now. That and basically the print statement. But it's better than nothing, so I'll take it. It certainly couldn't get any worse. Okay, so now we've got that set. So let's start looking around at the good stuff. Here we've got an X page that says it's X company list. And what do we have on here? We've got our custom control, which contains buttons, and we've got a view control right here that's viewing our companies. And we've got some check boxes and probably a means to delete a company. So how does that work? All right, if we find our X page, X company list, that's all this is. So if we click around here, we can see that it almost looks like a subform, quite honestly, and that's all I'm really using it for here. So other than that, we've got our X page, and we've got this little control here, which is our view. And let's see how we built that. Now I'm going to come over here to container controls, and if you don't have all this fancy stuff here, don't panic. This comes from the XPages extension library, which requires 852 and was just released on OpenNTF about a week or so ago, and it's insanely awesome. So I've only spent about 10 minutes on it, and I won't ever have it not installed. So you do want to get this and kind of learn how to use it. And if you don't know how to use it, I'm sure I'll be screencasting about it once I figure it out myself. If anyone has figured it out and they want to tell me how to do it, that'll just speed up the process. So, okay, so how do we do this? We want to put a view on here. So what I want to do is just come to our container controls, find a view, and I'm going to just drag this over here, which is right what I did up top here. And okay, it's kind of complicated. I'm going to basically say the current database, and what am I going to do? I'm going to let's pick a view. So let's do view companies, and then this is kind of cool. It tells you what kind of fields or columns are there, and you can choose which ones you want to see or not. So let's just choose the name in this case here, and not mess with the key. And I say okay. And now I've got my view. And if you notice on the view, it comes with a pager. Okay, you see the pager here that we've clicked on. And we can change the styling of this pager. And we can save this. And we can refresh. So now this looks a little different. Now, it's only one page. But we can control how the page looks very easily. Now, next thing I notice is I can click on these things. These are links. Okay, well, how do we do that? Well, if I click on this column here, and if we find, let's see here, I think it's display, we can just say show values in this column as links. And that's really all there's to it. So if we refresh this, oh, now they're links. Okay, well that's kind of cool. Now the reason why this works so easily is because of that item in the form where we linked the document to an X page. So that kind of is what really allows that to happen. If we hadn't have done that, then we could have at this stage of the game we could have associated an X page with a document's form right here and done that manually. But you'd have to do that every time you would do this. So that's kind of silly. So if you associate at the form level, it's kind of once and done. Okay, so what else do we have going on here? Well, we've got checkboxes here. All right, well, how do we get that? Let's go back into our view column, display, and we can just say checkbox. Save this, and we can do a refresh, and now we have our checkboxes. Okay, what were we missing now? That delete button. Okay, well, we can handle that. So we can come over to our core controls, and we can find a button, and then we can drag it on here, and we can say delete. Selected. Okay, now as you would expect, buttons have events. So we can come here to events, and we can say simple action, add action. Now, these are not your grandfather's simple actions, okay? These are cool simple actions because we can not only pass in kind of some parameters to manipulate the action, we can also compute the parameters to manipulate the action. So they are infinitely more powerful than what we had before in the Notes client or like the view actions or something like that. So there is a simple action here that basically says delete selected documents. And from what view? And this is the original view name, and since I didn't rename it, when I built the second one, we'll say view panel 1 and confirmation text. Are you sure? All right, we say yes, and we hit save, and we're going to refresh this. And if we click on test company and we say delete, now this pops up kind of via the client here. Are you sure? And we say okay, and it's gone. End of story. I mean, how easy is that? Well, it can get a little more difficult if you want. If we look at this first delete button here, I didn't use a simple action in this case. I used code. I used server-side JavaScript, so I wanted to go over that with you. So this really should not be that difficult to follow. What's going on here is I'm creating a variable called viewPanel1. And this really, don't get this confused with the name of this viewPanel1. It has nothing to do with each other. I should have named it something else when I dragged it on. So again, it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. So if I go back in here to the script, that's what happens when you don't plan these shows out as well as you should. Okay, anyway, so what I have is I create this variable called viewPanel. Oh, I guess there was no one there. That's also contact lenses. Anyway, so get component companies. So that gets at the component companies, which is the name of the original view, and it puts it into viewPanel. Okay, that's kind of cool. So now we say get the IDs that have been selected. How do we do that? We create another variable, which is an array, and it's just you don't need to say it's an array in JavaScript. You can just give it a name, and it's kind of like a variant, I guess. And we say viewPanel dot get selected IDs. So just kind of like the back end in LotusScript, it's just a method that you can use to get whatever has been checked. All right. Now this little bit, this is just a JavaScript for loop, which I probably got from either W3 Schools or someone else's blog post. Certainly I would have known how to do that by myself, so it can't be that hard to find. Then we come down into the loop, and now we're going to iterate over the selected documents. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called docID, and that's going to give me the document ID, which is what is returned here, the selected IDs so this is the current document ID that we're working with. Okay, so now I've got the current one we're working with. Then finally, I create a notes document, a pure notes document that we've known and loved in LotusScript, and I say get database, get document by ID, and then that doc ID. Okay, well let's look at a couple things here in this line because this is kind of cool. I didn't declare database. database is just given to you. Why? Because it's over here, right here in this global objects section. So we can take advantage of all the methods and properties that we're really used to in the Notes database. And we don't have to declare database or session because they're global, and again, they're just given to you. So how cool is that? That just is going to save you gobs of typing that we've always had to do. The dim session as new Notes session crap. Okay, so if we come over here, this colon notes document or this colon notes object piece. This is optional, but you want to do that when you declare your variables. Why? Because if you type something like this, that's how it knows to give you the type ahead of the methods, etc. So it's worth your while to do that because this is quite honestly pretty cool. Okay, and then finally, I just manually delete the documents that have been selected one at a time via script. So this button with this code or the simple action do the exact same thing. And that is basically our first page of the sample app. And what I'm going to do, so I don't confuse myself as we go on to this, I'm going to just clean up after myself a hair. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to delete that. Okay, so now let's look at the company. So if we click on a company, we can see fields for the company. We can say a new company and create new company test. So we can say submit, and now we've got new company here. We could do another new company and just hit submit and see that there are fields that are required. Okay, so we need to figure out how that works. So let's check that out. So the company is done on this X page called X Company. And the first thing that I want to highlight here is unlike the company list, which was not bound to any data, just contained a view control, this whole page is bound to a form. And you can see the data source here in the data tab. The form is F Company. The data source name is company. The default action is create document. How did I create that? With this add button. I added a Domino document and kind of filled that stuff out. So now a Domino document is always going to be associated with this form. And that's cool because that gives us basically a global object. So if we wanted to see this in script, and I just want to show you this, that company here is the notes document for the most part. So that gives me an instant handle on whichever document is loaded. So if I do a new company, and let's go back to the data, then the default action is create document. If I access the company this way, it just knows from the link that you clicked on, which document to load. And it's not a new document anymore, it's an existing document. So that's cool, that kind of does that for you. So we've got fields on here. How did these fields get there? Well, if we go over to this data tab, basically we have a list of the fields that are available in the form. And we can easily, or not so easily, but we can easily select all these fields and drag them on. And now we have a wizard in here where we can say add a couple things. We could not have a couple things show up if we wanted to. We could change something to like a text area, etc., and then just say OK. And now that's how we've gotten our fields there. If we want to look at an individual field, if we click on it and we see data, we can see that it's bound to company. And remember, you can have more than one data source on an X page at a time, so you can choose. So this one's bound to company and it's bound to the name field. And that just works pretty well. If we wanted to, and of course I have mouse issues. If we wanted to, here we could even delete it. We could drag a field onto it and see how it kind of builds the table for you automatically. So what I do is I just drag the field onto it like that, and then I move it where I want. Then I kind of delete this, which I'm sure there's a better way to do that. But if you're manually just dragging fields on or so, that's one way to do it. If you're pulling from your data source, alternatively, you can come to your core controls and just drag an edit box straight on, and then come to your data and then just manually pick your field. So like everything in life, there's like 5 ways to do everything. Okay, so that's how we have got our fields there. Now I'm going to delete this. I'm going to attempt to delete this. There we go. And it's gone. So now we have data validation on here. So we do new company, we do submit. So these 2 fields are required, the name and address one. Well, how's that work? If I click on name, well, there's a validation tab right here. And all I have to do is make a check mark and say it's required, and company name is required is the message. So that's pretty easy. I could come over here and do length and do a similar message here. Address one basically does the same thing. Now, what the sort order is, I don't know if it's actually alphabetical or not. I'm quite honestly not sure how to control that yet. But it still works, so that's kind of like half the battle. So where does this error message block come from? It comes from this error messages control. Okay, and that is a core control. If we come down here, and it's display errors. Okay, so this will grab every error that it throws up, every validation error. Alternatively, we can take display error, which is more of an individual message, and maybe like throw it next to it. And then in this case, we just have to say, we have to link it to whichever field we want to link to. In this case, it's name1. If we click on here, we can see in the name, it's name1. And we could even do another one. And we could do address one. And then if we save this, and we did let's go to home and then new company. We say submit. Now it's showing up in both places. Now, of course, it might need some styling, etc. But this is how you can do validation. This is server-side validation, not client-side. It didn't pop up in the middle of the screen here, right? It's just on the page, and that's just kind of a pleasant UI experience. Okay, so a couple of things I want to show you is as we talk about our data, in this case we've got a document, we can have events associated with that document. And it's kind of the events that we would kind of expect to have in classic notes development. So we've got query open, query save, post new document, post open, post save, etc. And if we look at post new document, we can see that there's some code here that does something. And this basically says if it's a brand new document, I want to create a unique key at unique and put it in the field company replace item value company key. So that's kind of how I pre-populate a unique key. And if we look at that and we say right here it is. So that's where this comes from. Okay, now this is a little fancier than it needs to be, so because I wrapped this in a session.evaluate, and the reason I did this because at unique is available. If we come over here under our libraries, we've got all sorts of functions down here. So that's familiar. You know how to use all of these, and actually we even have a function called at unique. But the kind of the gotcha here is this at unique, when used to generate a key, generates a different type of key, or it's a different format key than the old-fashioned notes one. So by wrapping this one in session.evaluate, I get that old format of the time, date, and the based on your name, stuff like that, which I kind of like. So that's just what's going on there. Nothing too special. I've got some other code here in post open document. And what this does is for an existing document, this is going to actually reach out to the session scope, this area in memory that's per user, and it stays through multiple pages. So I'm going to create a session scope variable called company key, and I'm going to put this variable into the session scope. And I'm going to simply read in the company key. So company.getItemValueString company key. Now again, how did I get a handle on this document? And all this really is a notes document, kind of for the most part. And it's basically given to me because it's a global. Technically, this is more of what's called an XPS document, which is similar to a UI document. So you've got some of the methods that you're going to be interested in, but not everything. But if you wanted to, you have a method to get the actual backend notes document. Again, very similar to source and Lotus script, the source UI document, etc. So it's not a lot of code to put this variable into memory to reuse later. Okay, and where do we want to reuse this later? Well, if you notice, and we'll come back to home, and we'll click in here. If you notice, we've got a view that's only showing particular related contacts. Well, this is the equivalent of a show single category embedded view in the Notes client. So we need to know what this company key is and reference this in the view. Now, I didn't have to use a scope variable. It was just basically kind of easier, and it has an advantage for later on. I could have pulled it right from either the page or the backend document, but I chose to use scope. So how does that work? Well, all I did was I dropped a view on here, similar to like I did before, and this view is a view of contacts. And if we look at the view of contacts, the first column is the company key. Okay, that's easy enough. So it's not actually categorized. This is actually a flat view, but it doesn't matter. It kind of behaves the same way because the view has this setting here: filter by column value. And if you see this blue diamond, it's computed. So if we look at this and we look at compute value, all I'm doing here is retrieving from the session scope that company key, session scope.get comp key. Okay, so the session scope, the variable, the key that I put in memory, now I'm taking it back out of memory and feeding it into this view, and that's how it knows to filter by this particular company key, and it works rather well. And that's really how you do a show single category embedded view for the most part. But again, no categories are really needed. Now, if I wanted to, I could come into this view and I could come into this column and somewhere I can say visible is off. And look at this. And if we kind of refresh this, then it just looks a little nicer. And of course, I can click on these things to open up contacts, kind of like as you would expect, because similar to what I did before, is in this column here, in display, we have show values in these columns as links. So that's how that works. And I can even say, do I want to open it in edit mode or read-only mode, etc. So there's nothing too special about that. Okay, so before we move on, I want to take a minute to talk about the source. And it's not the true source for those the picky people who are still watching. But if you don't know any better, it's good enough for the source. The true source is really Java that no one wants to touch. So don't. So what this is basically an XML representation of the page. So you can edit this directly. I come in here somewhat often to, well, I guess we'll sometimes clean it up, but to like add things that we don't have controls for. Like there's no control here for a field set, like you might want to have in HTML. Well, you could simply just type it in, and then you'd have to close it and put your legend in, etc. So you can wrap your content around there like you would expect. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of powerful. One thing that I do want to show you is if we click on a button here, notice that it kind of highlights in this outline as we move around. So you can move around through the outline. You can move around through the IDE. But when you go to the source, whatever is your focus on is highlighted here. So it's very easy to see all the code that makes up this button. So we could come in here if we wanted to, and we could do add contact. And if you notice, this updated live. See, wait, watch it. Ah, there it is. Want to see it again? So that's really kind of cool because now as you move around in the source, these little pretty properties kind of follow you. So here's like the table row. Let's find something of more interest here. The data, this should open up the data tab. Okay, this got to the all properties actually. But anyway, as you move around here, here's a table. So if you want to work in the source, you're not totally on your own. You can easily get to the properties and add some style. See how class just kind of like showed up there, etc. So it is very powerful, and all the better XPage developers than me probably spend a lot more time in the source than I do. Probably most of their time is done in their source. I'm not quite there yet. I still do a lot with the IDE. But where it really did get kind of powerful in the source, and 852 I think it was, is you can go into a custom control now and drag it right into the source to have it show up there, which that wasn't available in 851 or 85. So that is a big help when you're working with a lot of custom controls, and you will. Okay, so that is kind of how this show single category embedded view works. So if we come down here, so next on my list is this contact list option. So what is this? Well, this is a list of all our contacts, and it has our company names. But the company name is not stored in the contact document. And if you don't believe me, and quite honestly I wouldn't, if we look at the contact, there's a company key, but there's no company name here. And I know we could have it underneath the scenes, but you have to trust me that it's not. So all we're storing is the company key. Well, how does this work? What's going on is we're taking this company key and we're doing a live lookup. So if we come over here and we click on Disney and we say Disney 2 and we submit this and we come here. Okay, no agent was harmed in this process. So we did a live lookup here. So how does the live lookup work? Well, let's see here. So what I've done here is I created a view, just like I've created every view so far, just dragged it on. But what I did was I went into the view, I actually clicked here, and I basically did insert a column. And that gave me a blank column here. Okay, not bad. And I gave it a little title here called company, a little label. And I came down to data, and I put some code in. I computed it, basically. Okay, well, if you've used Lotus script, there's nothing too fancy about this. So I create a variable called key, and I say it's contact.getColumnValue company key. Well, where does contact come from? That's actually kind of a good question. I think contact is, if we go to all properties for this view, is I came in here to a var, and for the data var, and I gave the name of contact, and that gives me a handle on each view row as it iterates. So now I know how to go ahead and process the current row. So if we come back here, so basically this is the current row, and I assign the value of it to the variable key. And then I just do a DB lookup. So again, this is really cool, being able to use @ functions and backend objects all inside server-side JavaScript. And then whatever it gets returned, I return it, return lookup. And that's how you do a lookup inside a view. It's not that complicated, really. Okay. The next thing I want to show you is this repeat control. And it's not a pretty repeat control. I've got a much slicker design coming in the next screencast. But this is basically just to show you that I'm iterating over these contacts, but it doesn't really look like a view. I've kind of placed fields differently, and of course I don't have great test data. I've got a pager over here. Actually, I've got a pager at the top and the bottom. They're actually styled differently, but they kind of keep in sync, etc. So again, this isn't really pretty to look at, but that's really not the point. So how do we do this? Well, if we come into our XPage contact repeat, I've created a repeat control. And a repeat control is a container control right here. And let's see if we can make some space. All right, I'll do it up here. And I just drag a repeat over here, and there's nothing to it. Okay, there just isn't. So what I usually like to do is I'll drag a panel in, and now I can start laying down some fields. And that's what I've done here. Actually, I probably dragged a what is this? Is this a panel? Yeah, a panel, and then I put a table inside it to kind of help do some field layout. And then I just basically came into my core controls and started dragging edit boxes all around. And what do I do here? Is I say this edit box is bound to contact name. Okay, well, where's that come from? Well, if we look at the repeat control, the repeat basically is going to repeat a simple data binding. It's a contact view. And where does that come from? Well, right here. So I've bound the contact view to the page. So it's available anywhere on the page. Okay? And I go into the repeat, and I just say I'm going to use that contact view, which I've previously made available on the page. Okay? And then the key is, which is this is not done for you, is you have to come into this collection name, which is a really bad name in Notes. It really doesn't mean collection name. It means current row I'm working on. But that was a little too long, so they called it collection name for some silly reason. So the collection name is called contact. And again, it's the current row. Sometimes I like to use row data because that's what Nathan started with, but sometimes I'll give it a more meaningful name. So this is my access point to the current row. Okay, and the rest is kind of downhill from there. So I say it's name. I say it's contact and address. And what this really is, and what view was I binding? View contacts. These are actually not fields. These are actually the titles of your view. Name, address 1, address 2. So that is what in this instance, that's the old one or the new one, that is what we're referencing here. So these are actually the view titles. And it works. So I can lay these out however I want. I can style them however I want. And that's basically a repeat control. I could even do a lookup inside this repeat control if I wanted to. But that's a topic for another day. And that's how we do this repeat control. Okay? Next in our list is partial refresh. So let's look at this. So here's a view of contacts. And let's say I want to filter by company. So if we say Disney 2, because I didn't fix it, I say find contacts, and I'll watch the time closely. I say find contacts. This has updated, but the time has not. I have partially refreshed the screen. This is Ajax, and this really wasn't that hard. So let's see how that works. So if we come into Designer, and let's just close up a couple of these things. We'll say no. I don't know what I did there. And we'll say, look at this page for partial refresh. Okay, so there's a couple things going on here. First, I've got a computed field on this page, and the value is simply @now, just like you might do in the Notes client. Okay, next thing I have is a little drop-down box. If we look at the data, I've bound this to the view scope, so it's only the page. It's not the life of the user session. So if I come out of this and come back in, it's lost, and I just have to start all over again. So that is kind of where the view scope difference is different than the session scope. Okay, so the value of this is saved into the view scope, and it's called search company. Well, where does this drop-down list come from? That's a good question. So here's how you do a populate a drop-down list. This is kind of cool because I can hard code like instructions, select one, and then down here, and you can move these around and stuff like that. I can compute them. So if we compute it, it's basically just a DB column into the name of our company's view. Okay. Now, you do have a potential for a 64K problem, but I didn't in this database, so it's all good. So we say cancel to that, and that's how we have the drop-down populate. Well, this view is just like I showed it before. If we look at the data, filter by column value, and I'm reading in that session scope variable. And that's pretty much all there is to it. at least getting the view on the page and getting the filter to work. Now, how does the partial page refresh work? Well, if we look at the button, and we click at events, and there's a couple things going on here. The first thing I want to show you is partial update. So when this button gets clicked and this code, whatever it is, gets run, then partially update only this ID element, which is view panel. If we click on this, I hope it's called view panel 1, and it is. Okay, so let's look at this code that's inside here. And what's going on here, this kind of seems redundant, but this is just kind of error trapping. Because what's going on is we searched the company here, and we saved that to a view scope variable, and that is what we retrieve in our filtering, this view scope variable. But what we do is inside the button and inside this code, what's going on is you could delete a company, but you might like leave orphan contacts behind. I think I just had a bug in it or so. So what this kind of did is just did some error trapping. So what I did is I create a view object and I get a handle on the view, and then what I'm doing is getting a notes view entry. I'm creating a notes view entry, and I'm getting the view get entry by key. And instead of doing a scoped variable thing, just to give you another example here, I'm doing a get component combo company get value. And this is that's what this thing is called, the get combo company. So I'm doing a get the value that's selected there, and this is kind of like interacting with the UI document field get text and field set text. So it's just another way, if you didn't want to use a scoped variable to get something from your page to work with. And what I did is, in case it was null, then I put the view scope was blank, and then assuming we found an entry, then I did an entry get column values to find the right key or so. So again, this is just kind of like an alternate approach to do it, but this one contains a little more robustness for in case there's a problem if you actually try to click on something that didn't exist or so. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing there, because I know I'm confused right now. And if we come back here, that is pretty much all I'd like to show you in this demo. So I thank you for sticking around. I hope this was helpful, and I thank you for your time. For further information, xpagesblog.com is a great, XPages focused blog that's out there. For me, my favorite site is xpageswiki.com, which Julian Buss does, and he's got more bite-sized snippets or so. So it's very easily digestible, rather than pulling a big application apart if you're just looking for little things. So that's always my starting point. There's a whole bunch of bloggers out there on XPages nowadays. So Planet Lotus is the central hub for that. There's some good paid resources out there. tlcc.com. I bought that lesson, their first XPages one, the day it came out. That's great stuff. Matt White, xpages101.net. I signed up for that the day that came out, and he's got about 15-minute videos every week, and his are much better than the NotesIn9 stuff. So they're more advanced, they're more fleshed out. So if you like what I've done, you're gonna love what Matt does. And then XPages Bootcamp from The View is running as this is being recorded. They're doing a 3-city tour that might get expanded. I'm going to put some samples on probably NotesIn9 for sure, probably lotusnotebook.com. And for any other information, you can contact me. You can email me. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Skype. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you are still with me. Have a nice day.